Well, it's a hearty good morning to everybody on this Wednesday morning, I guess. The last day of January, January 31, 2024. Wow. It's amazing to me just how quickly time goes when you're having a great time. And you all just provide the best opportunity to have a good time. Thank you for your comments from yesterday. Thank you for some of the questions that were asked. Maybe we can put this all together. I had mentioned Psalm 51 at the end and got some responses from folks. So we're going to look at that a little bit today as it would relate. As you look at Peter, you're going to see you're going to see some similarities to what David went through and how David prayed. Just in that very simple scene of Peter going out and weeping. And then we're going to get down there. We're going to end up looking at the contrast, because you say, well, what about Judas? Wasn't he upset? Didn't he weep? Well, you're going to see a difference between actions, reactions, and all that, so that you get a good understanding of how all of this fits together. All right. Rick, good morning to you and Lena. It's good to see you, along with Teresa up there this morning. God bless. And there is my buddy Daniel. Good to see Daniel this morning. It just always brushes my heart when I see them up there knowing that they're at work and still listening. It's such a blessing. Miss Ruth, love you. Give a shout out and a hi to Kenneth if you would. Miss Sue, there you are with your big fluffy bunny. I love that bunny. I love my Miss Sue. She is so sweet. There's my Miss Sherry. Good morning, dear brothers and sisters. The God who loves us forever. Yes, he does. Lives forever. Michael, good morning to you. Another one of my brothers that listen from work. What a blessing. Miss Terry, good morning, everybody. I love my Hall Boulevard family. I do too. And we stretch out all over the place, and I love you all. Pastor Sadich, when you watch this, I want you to know I love you. Praying for you. I know I got a message. I'm going to read it yet. Pastor Luciano, to you, we love you. It's good to have you there. And Pastor Raphael as well. That's our out-of-country brothers, if you will. And there's so many more that, there's an Andrew that watches from Italy every once in a while. And there's some others that just a blessing. So God bless you. We love you. Brenda and Brent, good morning to you. Also, Mr. B's birthday today. Oh, Mr. Brent's birthday. Everybody, happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, dear Brent. Happy birthday to you. I know that made your day. I love you, brother. What a great brother. Miss Terry, good morning, and she says, good, happy birthday, Brent. And there is Miss Linda, also giving a happy birthday shout out, along with Miss Alyssa and Cam, Karen, Cody. Did you all sing happy birthday to him? Huh? Did you join me? Did you? Well, at any rate, Miss Therese, thanks for letting me know I have some, the current day, January 31. Absolutely. God bless you. It is that day in the month. Tomorrow will be February, and Friday will be, I think, is that not Groundhog Day or something like that? At any rate, let's jump in. We've been looking at, let me put, might help if I put this up there. There we go. Peter's faith. All right, because we do see a wonderful glimpse into the faith of Peter through his brokenness. We get a hint of that in verse 72 when it dawns on him just how badly he has blown it. Immediately a rooster crowed the second time, and Peter remembered how Jesus had made the remark to him, behold, before a rooster crows twice, you will deny me 3 times. And he, everything just comes flooding in. And he begins to weep. And that word means not just a sob. He's racked, people. He's racked with grief. He can't contain himself. I believe he takes off from that courtyard And I think the closer he gets to the gate, the faster he moves. And all the time, he's weeping. I think his hands are up to his face, not just to hide his face, but to try and contain his grief. When he denied the third time, knowing and being a disciple of Jesus, when that rooster crowed again, he immediately, his memory kicks in, and that word immediately, we ought to highlight that. That's I've said all along, that's one of Mark's favorite words. That's a key word throughout Mark. I mean, it didn't take long. That rooster crowed. It hit him in the ears, and I mean, there was this immediate response. There was this broken heart, this gushing of tears that begin. His memory kicks in. He's overwhelmed with deep conviction, a broken heart, and he takes off, broken down and weeping. If you've ever had a broken heart like that, if you've ever had your own, midnight rooster crow, that it just brings brokenness to your heart, you'll know exactly the way Peter felt. I've had that rooster crow many times in my life, but the most significant time was one day getting ready for work, and looking in the mirror and wondering, and this is why Psalm 51 becomes important to me, looking at that mirror and realizing as a young man how far I had gone, and not realizing how I'd even really gotten there, and looking for someone or something to blame. And it was like the voice of God pointing his finger at me and saying, "You're the reason. You're the man." Remember the broking of David. I was shattered, absolutely shattered at that point. So I can get kind of feeling, kind of an inkling within my own heart and life, how it must have been, for Peter. It's a tragic scene. He's fumbled. He's failed. But now he's fallen. And though it was the faltering faith on Peter's part, we need to know there is not complete failure here. This scene, well, at least it seems to me, reveals that Peter had a real faith in Jesus. He couldn't be this shattered without it. You say, well, what about Judas? Well, we'll get to him. And when we compare the two, you'll see exactly what I'm talking about. Peter's bold denials give way to a remorse as he realizes that he's fallen into precisely the trap that Jesus had warned him about. But it's precisely this story of his remorse which should encourage each of us, though he had a great fall. Nevertheless, he could and would be restored and renewed, even as Jesus said in Luke chapter 22. Verse 31-32 says, Simon, behold, Satan has demanded permission to sift you like wheat, throw you up, beat you to a pulp, throw you up. But when he's finished shifting you, all that's going to happen is the chaff is going to be blown away. But I prayed for you. Pray that your faith may not fail, and that when once you have turned again, strengthen your brothers. His faith may have faltered, but he didn't fall away. Notice that Peter's conviction led to a deep contrition. Not a remorse that led to an action of suicide. No, his was a deep contrition that led him to repentance. Contrite heart under conviction, even as David says. Turn, if you will, with me this morning to Psalm chapter 51. I want to apply this psalm to David, to Peter, and to you and me. All right? Let's pray. Father, I thank you so very much that we can come today and settle ourselves in your word. Open our ears, Lord. Unstop it, but we can hear clearly. That we can see and understand with enlightened hearts. Hearts made open by you. God, search us, try us, know our heart, O Lord. See if there be, and let us see anything in us that doesn't measure up to you, and let us bring that with the same kind of heart that Peter has, and lay it at the feet of Jesus. Oh, thank you, Lord. Thank you for your constant and continual intercession for us. Bless us now through your word, Lord, I pray. In your wonderful, wonderful and blessed name we pray. Amen. All right, Psalm 51. If you're there, join me as we read this together, all right? David writes in this great psalm, and we're going to look at 17, 18 verses, something like that. Be gracious to me, O God, according to your loving kindness, according to the greatness of your compassion, blot out my transgressions. Oh, wash me thoroughly from my iniquity, cleanse me from my sin. For I know my transgression, and my sin is ever before me. God, against you. And you only have I sinned and done what is evil in your sight, so that you are justified when you speak and blameless when you judge. Behold, I was brought forth in iniquity, and in sin my mother conceived me. Behold, you desire truth in the innermost part, and in the hidden part you will make me know wisdom. Oh, purify me with hyssop, and I shall be clean. Wash me, and I shall be whiter than snow. Make me to hear joy and gladness. Let the bones which you have broken rejoice. Hide your face from my sin and blot out my iniquities. Create in me a clean heart, O God, and renew a steadfast spirit within me. Do not cast me away from your presence, and do not take your Holy Spirit from me. Oh, restore the joy of my salvation, and sustain me with a willing spirit. Then I will teach transgressors their ways, and sinners will be converted to you. Deliver me from blood guiltiness, O God of my salvation. Then my tongue will joyfully sing of your righteousness. O Lord, open my lips that my mouth may declare your praise. For you do not delight in sacrifice, otherwise I would give it. You're not pleased with burnt offerings. The sacrifice of God is a broken spirit, a broken and contrite heart. O God, you will not despise, Lord. Let us hear David and Peter's plea and make it our own. To you be glory, Lord, in Jesus' name. Amen. I cannot quote or read that psalm without it flooding so many memories back Psalm 51 is a renowned expression of repentance. David, the greatest of Israel's king, fell into serious sin, if you remember, and recognized his need, and he pled with God for forgiveness. This confession, inspired by David's sin of adultery and deception and even murder over his relationship with Bathsheba. David's reasons for repentance are explained in 2 Samuel, chapters 11 and 12. You know how he was on the roof. It says that, in the days when the kings went out to war, David was on the roof. Well, he got in trouble, people, because he wasn't where he was supposed to be when he was supposed to be there. No, when the day the kings went out to war, David wasn't out at war. David was on the roof. And he looks down. He sees Bathsheba. And she's a beauty. He calls her to the king's palace, and he takes her into the bed, and he has his way with her, and she becomes pregnant by David. At first, David brought her soldier husband Uriah back from war, hoping he would sleep with Bathsheba, cover the illegitimate pregnancy. But Uriah was a loyal fellow soldier. He was an honorable man. And he refused to take special privileges while his friends, his fellow soldiers, were at war. David could have learned a lesson from Uriah. David even tried to get Uriah drunk, but he failed at that as well. Finally, David arranged for Uriah to be caught in the midst of a battle and maneuvered and killed. David then brought Bathsheba into his palace and made her one of his wives. In response, God sent the prophet Nathan to challenge David. Nathan told the story about a rich man stealing a poor man's one and only lamb. Outraged and in self-righteousness, David said the rich man deserved to die, and then that was David's rooster crowing moment. Nathan simply said, pointed a finger and said, "You're the man, David. You had many wives and you had all this wealth, but Uriah had one wife, and you took her, and you killed Uriah. You're the man." Standing one day, looking in a mirror, big drink on one side and cigarette the other, tried to get ready for work, hands shaking so bad. I'm in my early 20s, and I'm looking at myself in the mirror, and I'm thinking, who are you? How did you get here? And I didn't hear an audible voice, no. I didn't see a reflection in the mirror coming at me that wasn't me, no, but I saw, it was like a finger pointing at me through that mirror, saying, "You're the man. Nobody's to blame but you. Not your father's death, not the the experiences of your life, not the things that you've been through, not the people that have harmed you or hurt. You're the reason. You're the man." And my rooster crowed. Peter's standing in that courtyard on the porch, and his rooster crowed. And like David, he's shattered. Like me, he was shattered. Nathan goes on to explain that as a result of his sin, David's family would forever be embroiled in war. He would be a man of war, of conflict, scandal, and violence. Even though he's a man of God after God's own heart, and the child conceived with Bathsheba would not survive. And David would be humiliated in the presence of the people. Every one of these predictions came true. The rest of David's life was spent in turbulence, family controversies, that even included a full-fledged rebellion led by his own son, Absalom. How did David cry out? Oh, Absalom, Absalom. He said, if it were strangers that hated me and came after, I could withstand that, but it was one of my own, one I love dearly. Just because we confess and repent of our sin does not mean that we escape the consequences of our sin. I know there's a lot of people that say, if I thought when I came to Christ that it would all be all right. No, you see, we still bring the same baggage. You take a person that's been, stopped for drunk driving, there's still consequences, even though they may be a Christian and repent, or even if they get saved. There's the consequences of their sin. In this psalm, David confesses his sin to God, and he holds back nothing. I want us to take just a little time this morning and see how far we get into this, looking at the consequences of sin. Look at verses 1 and 2. Be gracious to me, O God, according to your loving kindness. According to your greatness of your compassion, blot out my transgressions. Wash me thoroughly from my iniquity. Cleanse me from my sins. Do you see? How would you frame David's feeling about himself? Look at such things as, blot out, which means to wipe away. Wash me thoroughly from my iniquity. Cleanse me from my sin. You see, friends, sin sours the soul. This is the first consequence of sin in the life of the child of God. David felt dirty. He felt filthy. He needed to be cleaned. This is one way we know that we're saved. When the unsaved sin, he may feel regret. And certainly when we look at Judas, he felt regret that led him to take his own life. Remorse even. But they never feel the real depth of the sinfulness of sin. Judas felt shame. But shame because it didn't work out the way he thought it was going to work out. It's like sheep. Sheep can fall into the mud and he immediately struggles to get out, whereas if it's a pig, he's got to lay down in the mud and roll around in it because it's home to the pig, because that's a pig's nature. We don't see Judas turning and crying out to God in remorse. Oh God, what have I done? Oh God, I've sinned against you. Oh God. No, he takes the money back and he throws it at him because he just wants to reverse what he's done. Because the attention is on him. But with Peter, the attention is on Peter. It's what he's done. How he failed his Lord. Follower of Christ may falter. We may fail. We may even, fall flat on our face sometimes. But he or she, whoever loathes it, whereas the non-follower will leap into sin because he or she loves it. If you can sin, and that sin doesn't make you feel grimy, doesn't hurt, doesn't bother you, doesn't make you feel dirty, then you need to take time to examine your relationship with God. That's what sin does. Look at verse 3. Verse 3 says, verse 3 says, for I know my transgression, my sin is ever before me. You see, another thing sin does is it, until it's dealt with, it saturates the mind. The thing that David had done reverberated through his soul, echoed through his conscience. He couldn't get rid of it. The same with Peter. Peter's absolutely overcome by the sin so prophetically proclaimed by the rooster. That crowing filled his mind. The echo of the crow pecked at his conscience. I'm looking in a mirror and I'm seeing every vile thing that I've done. I can't escape it. I tried booze. I tried all kinds of stuff to escape the sin, but it didn't work. If you can sin and easily forget your sin, then you again, you need to check in on your salvation. He says, my sin is ever before me. It may not be in your conscious mind continually, but it will be in your subconscious. It may show up as migraine headaches or the inability to concentrate or an irritable temper or the inability to pray. I've never known people, the most miserable people I know in the world are people that are under the conviction of sin. There's misery there. There are two kinds of wounds that may come to the human psyche. Guilt. Guilt is that wound that festers and festers and will never heal until it's lanced and cleaned and the poison drained out. There's two kinds of guilt, my friends. Two kinds. There's real guilt and there's imaginary guilt. Real guilt is associated with real sin. Imaginary guilt is associated with feelings. Peter demonstrates what happens with real guilt. Imaginary guilt is demonstrated in Judas. Feelings. Now, he did something absolutely wrong. He should have felt guilty. But you see, he was more concerned about himself than anything else. How many of you have ever confessed sin, laid it before God, and then went out still dealing with the guilt of that sin? So you rush back, you confess it again, but you still feel guilty of that sin. Is it real guilt or imaginary guilt? Well, can I tell you, if you confess your sins, He is faithful and just to forgive you sins and cleanse you of all unrighteousness. If you genuinely confessed and repent of that sin, did God cleanse you of that sin? The answer to that is yes. Now, the guilt that hangs on, that feeling, it's kind of like the guy that gets an arm amputated, but he still feels his fingers. It's phantom. It's not real. And instead of rushing back and confessing all over again, and because you're confessing something that God's already put away and doesn't even remember anymore, start thanking Him for the forgiveness that you've gotten. Sorrow is a clean wound. And because it's a clean wound, it heals. Look at verse 4. Against you, and you only have I sinned, and done what is evil in your sight, so that you are justified when you speak, and blameless when you judge. What do you see in that verse? Look at it. Against you, and you only, God, have I sinned, and I've done evil in your sight. You see, sin stings the conscience. It stings and leaves the stinger in. David's not crying out against the punisher, but against the sin. David sinned against his kingdom. He sinned against his own body. He sinned against his wife. He sinned against his children. But what bothered David primarily was that he had sinned against God. He'd sinned against Uriah. He'd sinned against Bathsheba. But in the long run, he had sinned against God, and that's what was stinging him. He was a child of God, a man after God's own heart. David saw his sin for what it really was: an assault, an attack, an affront to the very holiness of God. if all you're afraid of is punishment for your sin, then you don't understand the depths of sin. You see, as a child of God, we don't weep over our sin primarily because we're going to be punished, but because we disgraced our God. We see this in Peter. He was fully aware of whom it was that he had sinned against. And there's a difference between a slave and a son. When a slave obeys, he fears the whip, his master's lash. When a son disobeys, if he's a loving son, he fears the father's displeasure. David is brokenhearted that he has broken the heart of God. Look at two other verses, verse 8 and verse 12. Make me to hear joy and gladness. Let the bones which you have broken rejoice. Restore to me joy, the joy of my salvation. And sustain me with a willing spirit. He's not asking to have his salvation restored, is he? We can be saved and miserable. The most miserable man on earth is not an unsaved man. A lot of unsaved people living high and wide, folks. The Bible speaks of the pleasure of sin, though it's only for a season. You see, sin steals our joy. Hebrews 11:25 says, and he, speaking of Moses, chose to be mistreated along with the people of God rather than enjoy the fleeting pleasures of sin. Can I tell you something? If sin wasn't fun, none of us would want to do it, would we? We have to admit that there is a moment of pleasure in sin. But the writer of Hebrews calls it fleeting. That moment of pleasure can bring a lifetime of regret. Can it not? I mean, look at David. That moment of pleasure, look at the pain that it brought. And a lifetime of regret. Every time he thinks of that son that he ended up burying. David's praying for his joy to be restored. Because sin, and I didn't put it up there, but I'll give it to you, sin steals our joy. When God saves us, he doesn't fix us where we can't sin anymore. He fixes us where we can't enjoy sin the way we did anymore. The most miserable people on earth are people who are saved, but they're out of fellowship with God. If you want to know whether you're backslidden or whether or not you're saved or lost, do you have joy filling your heart? Do you have joy unspeakable and full of glory? Joy does best in the hard times. As Paul says, rejoice in the Lord always. And again, I say rejoice. He doesn't say be happy at all times. Happiness depends on what happens. Oh, joy depends upon Jesus. It's settled. Happiness is like a thermometer. It registers the conditions around us. Joy is like a thermostat. It controls the conditions around us. It's the joy of the Lord that is our strength, Nehemiah says. And joy is fixed. It doesn't change. We're to have joy all the time. There's one thing that can take away joy. And the only thing really, and it's not circumstances. We can be joyful in the midst of the worst of circumstances. Can we? But it's sin. Not only one kind of sin, not anybody's sin, but my sin takes away and robs me of my joy. Nobody else's sin has that kind of power. An ungodly government can't take away my joy. You know, loudmouth politicians and they can't take away my joy. They didn't give it to you, so they can't take it away. Jesus gives joy. Joy doesn't remove pain, but it helps endure pain. If joy's not there, it's because we're not abiding the way we ought to be. Someone once said that joy is the flag that is flown from the castle of the heart when the king is in residence. When I was in London, there's a lot of pomp because everybody's excited because there was a flag over the palace, and it meant that the Queen was in residence in London. Well, I think it's right. Joy is the flag that's flown from the castle of the heart when the King is in residence. We had verse 8 again. Make me to hear joy and gladness. Then look at the second part. Let the bones which you have broken rejoice. That's something else that sin does. Sin literally sickens the body. David is using, of course, poetry here and speaking in poetic terms. He's saying that God has him under extreme pressure, and sometimes people think that God will just cast them off if they sin. But on the contrary, he just simply squeezes a little tighter. The pressure of sin can actually literally make us sick. Many children of God are sicker than they ought to be. There are a lot of reasons for sickness, and I'm not saying that, I'm not going to be that person standing over the sick bed and saying, I'm not going to be Job's friend saying, you've sinned, therefore, I'm not going to do that, because where all sickness is created by sin, because if sin wasn't in the world, there wouldn't be death and sickness, right? But just because somebody is sick or they have, just because Tanya has MS doesn't mean that she's got MS because of sin, because she's sinned. No, there are conditions that are common to man. There are a lot of reasons, but one reason is sin in the life of the child of God. 1 Corinthians 11 verse 30 says, that's why many among you are weak and sick, and a number have fallen asleep. Paul's speaking about some who are irreverent at the Lord's table, and sometimes you can even get sick unto death. That term sleep is in this passage is used for the death of a child of God, not for the death of an unsaved person. When you're right with God, we smile more, we sleep better, we stand straighter, we digest our food better. Proverbs tells us that a merry heart doeth good like a medicine. That's a medicine we can all take. But we can't have joy and not the joy of the Lord if we're living outside the will of God, walking away from God, living in sin. Get rid of that, and our joy is restored. Well, I don't have time to pick up the next one. Now, there's a couple more here that I want you to get sight of, that we will grab onto tomorrow and run with as we get back in. But these are the consequences. These are what happens. We see it in the life of Peter. We certainly see it in David's life. And if you and I will examine ourselves and look back at those times, we can probably see it in our own life. It was always fun. And I'll close with this. I had one child that whenever they did something wrong and didn't get caught, they were miserable to be around. And Sherry and I would look at each other and we'd say, what is wrong with that child today? We got to the point that we recognized that that child was acting the way they were, and like a storm cloud around the house, because that's when we would go out and say, okay, we know what you did. And then the breakdown would come, and all of this would pour out. And then we would know what the child did. Because when they had done something wrong, they were miserable. And everyone around them was going to be miserable with them until they got it right. Father, I thank you so much that you teach us these lessons, that your word is given there for our instruction. And yes, Lord, for reproof and correction, absolutely. If we don't understand how these things work, then we miss out on the lessons that you want to teach us. I know one thing, Lord. When I look in the mirror, I see an imperfect man. But when I look in the mirror, I also see a man saved by the grace of God, covered in his blood. My sin dealt with, well, judicially. But every day, Lord, I have to deal with, am I walking right? Or have I strayed off the path? And I got to be honest with you, Lord. Because I know when I step off the path. But I thank you, Lord, that instead of turning me loose, you just squeezed me tighter. Now, Father, let us learn. Let us take your word to ourselves and Lord, make it the very substance of our soul, the meat on which we sustain ourselves. God, we love you. We thank you for this morning. I pray your blessing to be poured out on this precious family. In Jesus' name, amen. I love y'all. I love you. I love you. We know what you did, and we love you anyway. That's right. That would be the statement. We know what you did. We love you anyway. And then it would all come out. He knows what you did, and he loves you anyway. Well, may God bless you. May you have a great, wonderful day. I'll see you tonight at 6 as we get into Ezekiel 37, I believe, tonight. But you have a great day. You are blessed by God and a blessing to us. God be with each of you today.